and it's officially on there. There we go. All right. Well, Ed, hello, welcome in, man. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are
Th-
you doing, Dana?
I'm doing pretty well, sir. Pretty well.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So, for those who don't know, I'm just going to introduce you very quickly here. It's Ed Kressy we have on today. He's the author of My Addiction and Recovery. He's been featured in the Washington Post, the San Francisco Chronicle, Vox Magazine. You said you received the Community Service Award from the FBI as well. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So, a huge story. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your backstory here?
Well, I grew up your average PWG or PWM, privileged white male. You know, that I grew up in the idyllic woods of Massachusetts. I mean, life wasn't perfect. We didn't have, we weren't, life wasn't perfect, but there was very little I wanted for as a kid until I got to high school or so. Then I found that the things that really served me the best when I was a child, which were my imagination, my love of reading, the fact that I was a sensitive kid, those things that made for an idyllic childhood really didn't serve me so well in high school. I was also a pretty uncoordinated kid. I couldn't play sports or compete in gym class.
Did you play any
So,
sports at all?
no, I tried to play tennis and maybe do some other. I tried to play football because I went to a small high school. All the
Gotcha.
popular, yeah, the popular kids played football. I tried, but I just couldn't fit in. And in school, reading, crying, and being uncoordinated, not exactly a campaign platform for class president. So, Dana, the first thing or one of the first things I found that I really felt good at was drinking. 14 years old, drunk for the first time. I liked the feeling of being drunk, yet I loved the feeling that all of a sudden, boom, I belong in the world. People are laughing at my jokes. My remarks are garnering agreement. With drinking and later the heavy, heavy drug use I got into, it was my niche in the world. It was my way of feeling that I belonged. If you understand one thing about drug addiction, understand this. And this is from my perspective and what I've been taught. For a person who's addicted to drugs, as I was for 20 years, drugs are usually not our problem. Drugs are our attempt at a solution. And you and I were talking a little while ago about the nature of drug use and how it leads to negative consequences, yet it also leads to insights and gratitude and appreciation. My drug addiction spanned the course of 20 years. It got me to some terrible places: months in jail, nights in homeless shelters, years in destitution and deep psychosis. It also got me to some beautiful places. Drugs got me to a point, or drug addiction got me to the point, and this is after I left drugs behind, of course, got me to a point of spirituality. If I had never been addicted to drugs, I never would have found a belief in a God of my understanding, my personal understanding of God, which is the most important thing to me. Certainly, I never would have achieved my dream of being a writer. As you kindly mentioned, I've appeared in the Washington Post. My book was published. Hopefully, my writing not only serves to be an achievement in my life or serve as an accomplishment that I've done for myself. Hopefully, my writing serves to be of value to others who are struggling to overcome the same obstacles that I overcame.
I
Happy to
certainly
talk
hope
more and
so.
elaborate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as far as your book goes, do you talk about your life a lot in there, like growing up, childhood, and then some of the struggles you faced, or is it more a focus on what to do once you're in that situation?
Pretty much all I ever talk about is my life. I'm a very self-centered person. I talk about myself quite a bit. And when I talk about others, it's usually my perception of others.
Well, I think everybody falls into that, I mean, but it seems you've built your life around helping others though at this point. So I think it's a stretch to say you're a selfish person.
thank you. And while that is true, it's also true that I do it for reasons that are ultimately selfish, which are I'm thinking about the afterlife. I'm thinking about heaven, I'm thinking about reincarnation. I'm thinking about what does the universe want from me and how can I best set myself up for the one thing that I'm certain about in the future. And that one thing, of course, is that my time on this earth will end, as it will for all of us. Not for years and years, and you especially, Dana, being a very young man,
young buck,
young buck with many years, decades ahead of you.
We hope anyway.
Yeah, you've got a lot left to accomplish in the world, as do I, as do many of us. But really, the only one thing we know about the future with certainty is that our time upon this earth will end. We might not even make it to the end of this podcast recording.
Yeah, that's always possible.
Strike. Yeah, it could be
it's funny you mentioned that specifically, because last night when I was thinking about our conversation here today, I was thinking about that specifically because you'd mentioned being grateful in one of your talks. And that was something that hit home with me personally, was because when I spent 6 months homeless living out of my car at one point in my life after I went through a divorce. And that point in my life, there's a certain bar you never want to fall below in life. And you think that if you try your best and you do everything you can, that you will never fall. And I found out the hard way that sometimes in life, the odds are just stacked against you, or you haven't learned the correct lessons yet that will keep you afloat. And sometimes it really can drop off the bottom. And when I was going through that part of my life, living on the streets, it made me personally realize how little people care. I mean, did you experience that as well when you were on the streets, like just a lack of empathy from people around you who saw you?
I did experience a lack of empathy. What I came to realize was that the failure was really on my part. It was my failure to find the compassion that was out there. Maybe not 100% from 100% of the people. When I did start to turn my life around, I discovered that we find what we're looking for a lot of times in life. If we get up every day and say, life sucks, man, people are out to get me and this is always how it's going to be. Well, if that's what we're telling ourselves, our experience is going to reflect back to us the conclusion we've already drawn. We shape our beliefs shape our experiences more so than our experiences shape our beliefs. That's what I have found to be true. For example, my mindset was very much like the one I'm hearing you describe. Not seeing empathy, not seeing, and mine, and I'd love to talk to you more about this at length, because
for sure.
your insights are probably deeper than mine, or we probably have ways that we sync, and at least I'm certain ways I can learn from you, and maybe you can learn from me. For me, everybody was in on this FBI conspiracy. Okay, in my mind they were.
Yeah, tell us, explain that to us, because we haven't really talked about that too much yet. Because you had mentioned that was a big part of the psychosis you went through.
It was a huge part. Yeah, I was in meth psychosis. I was smoking a lot of methamphetamine. I'd been addicted to meth for 11 years, which is a long time. And out of those 11 years, I did meth pretty much every day. There were some days when I was out of money or for various, actually, I shouldn't say that. I did meth every day for probably 4 years. For the first several years of my addiction, I would work during the week and I would take time off. So I probably did meth every day for whatever. The point is, I did a lot of meth. When I started smoking it, I began hearing disembodied voices. People started following me, or at least so I believed. Airplanes, helicopters. pictures of myself on the internet and in magazines. Ultimately, I discovered it all related to the fact that I had inadvertently befriended a 9/11 hijacker. When
this was the story from Thailand, right?
This is good memory. Yeah.
Tell us the story here.
In reality, and I use the word fact, which I should qualify by saying, in my mind, it was a fact. In my mind, I had absolutely befriended a 9/11 hijacker who was really an undercover operative who had infiltrated the terrorist cells, and now the government wanted to silence me for knowing too much about a 9/11 cover-up. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Man. I had these, Dana, if you, when people like me are in psychosis, which is similar to paranoid schizophrenia from what I understand, when we're in psychosis, it's important to remember we don't think that there are conspiracies. We don't think we're hearing voices. We believe it. The disembodied voices I used to hear were as real as your voice is now. I believed in the conspiracies as much as I believe that you and I are recording a podcast now. These are very real, very deep beliefs. To get back to your insightful question, all the people around me demonstrated not only a lack of empathy, but a hatred of me, because they were vigilantes employed by a shadowy government faction having architected a 9/11 conspiracy against me. This was a global conspiracy that the FBI and the CIA and the DOD were throwing incredible amounts of money and resources at. Again, all in my mind due to methamphetamine I mean, there could have been a conspiracy. Well, there could have been. And the guy I knew could have been a hijacker, but the point is.
So he wasn't even the same guy. I understood it to be that it was the guy and that's what started this, but you're not even sure it was the guy?
I mean, I can show you the pictures. The guy I knew in Bangkok, my friend, he looked a little bit like one of the hijackers. The hijackers did go to Bangkok. You can read the 9/11 report. So he yes, technically he could have been.
It's enough to convince you, though.
Well, and even if I had met a 9/11 hijacker, certainly I did nothing to assist the terrorists. And certainly it doesn't mean that the FBI had architected a conspiracy in which invisible stealth bombers with my family and friends aboard were beaming disembodied voices into my head. Right?
Definitely not. I would hope not, anyway. I don't think we've even gotten there in 2020 yet. So
and finally, it's taken me 20 minutes to answer your straightforward question. I felt a lot of lack of empathy and a lot of hatred from people. One of the first persons who taught me that there was compassion for me, ironically as this sounds, was the police officer who arrested me. The first time I ever got arrested, or the first time I was ever arrested and booked, a police officer, Officer Pagano, I was in the police station in San Francisco, shackled to a steel rail, tears pouring down my face. My dog, I'd left leased to a parking meter when Officer Pagano arrested me, and I thought I'd never see my dog again.
Were you homeless at this point?
I was very close. Yeah, I would have gone maybe another week or a couple of weeks before I was homeless. I was tapped out.
What were you arrested for?
I was arrested because I actually had completely run out of money, nothing to feed my dog, nothing to feed myself, shoplifted hamburger. Then, and at the same time, San Francisco had some very unfair laws at the time. I mean, they were so unfair. The laws in San Francisco were such, a guy like me couldn't even walk around with a loaded 357 in my waistband and a 16th of an ounce of meth in my pocket.
Couldn't even? That's ridiculous, man. What a
draconian,
restrictive, oppressive government do we live under?
I mean, you might as well take away freedom of speech.
You might as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And Officer Pagano, so much to her credit, she it's funny how God, or I believe in God, it's funny how circumstances, life, fate, whatever you want to believe in, it's funny because Officer Pagano, she was a big time dog lover, a dog owner. I didn't know it at the time. She carried dog treats in her pocket. And when she arrested me, the security guards had followed me out of the supermarket. They basically must have seen my gun.
Mm.
in my waistband, because police, I didn't use the gun in the robbery, but anyway, Officer Pagano had her pistol pointed at me, doing a arrest protocol. She had me set down the hamburger, put my hands behind my head, handcuffed me. As all this is going on, my dog, Mickey, ate the hamburger. So he just
oh my God.
the evidence,
He's an accomplice at this point.
He ended up doing 60 days in the kennel on an obstruction of justice.
No. They lock him up too.
Yeah,
well, honestly, that's a good thing they didn't put him down, because I would be afraid of something like that happening in a situation like that.
That's what I was afraid of. In fact, that's a great point, because when I got arrested, I decided I wasn't going to, I was in the holding tank. I decided I wasn't going to call any of my relatives. I was going to show them, that attitude we get sometimes. I'm going to show I'm going to sit here and rot in jail, and that'll show them.
Yeah.
That's where I was at. The one reason I did call for help from my relatives was because of my dog.
Did you have a strained relationship with your relatives at that point?
Yeah, and did I have a strained relation? Yes, absolutely. If you are struggling, a lot of people contact me because they're struggling, their loved ones are struggling. Understand this. Oftentimes when we're in meth addiction and possibly other kinds of addiction, we are very close to you in our minds. You are always with us in, I hesitate to say spirit. Let me describe it in concrete terms. When I heard disembodied voices in my meth psychosis, they were often the voices of my relatives. They were often the voices of my friends. So my relatives were always right there. And the voices were as crystal clear as yours is now, Dana. Mm-hmm. So I was always interacting with my relatives. I was always talking to them. I was always hearing from them. They were very hateful towards me. They were stealing from me. They were threatening to kill me, all in my psychosis. Even though I hadn't called my aunt or my uncle or my parents in months, I still spent every day with them in my mind.
Right.
Okay. So if your loved one is struggling, it may very well be that she or he feels very close to you, but because of the psychosis, because of the nature of addiction, their mind, as my mind was, is so twisted. It's their reality is so different from the reality of a non-addicted person, that your loved one believes she or he is with you. It's complex, and it's a phenomenon. But you were going to say something?
Do you think that led you to feel feelings towards them that weren't necessarily based on fact? Like, did you feel hatred towards them for things that they were saying to you that were negative, even though they hadn't said those things?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I felt so much anger towards them. I believed they were in on the conspiracy. I believed they were working for the Mossad and had spied on the United States and had something to do with 9/11 that they were pinning on me. I believed these things, yes. So, and it hasn't gone away to this day. And what I mean to say is the remnants of that anger and that hatred hasn't.
It's real.
Feel it, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason I have a small taste of this, when in 2011, I went through my second divorce. And at that point, I really broke down mentally. I had like a pretty extreme mental breakdown, to the point where I got diagnosed with psychotic depression. And that was one of the symptoms of that, was hearing things that weren't there and remembering things that hadn't happened, and recalling things happening that weren't happening. And I remember, it's funny because I still live with the guy. I've been friends with this guy since 6th grade, and we're roommates still to this day. But yeah, I remember laying in bed one day and hearing him talk to this girl I liked in the living room about how they'd poisoned me, and how that, like, do you think he's dead yet? Do you think, like, maybe we should go check and see if it's worked yet? No, we'll give it another couple minutes. Fuck that guy, talking horrible things about me. And I remember laying there in bed just going like, well, they poisoned me and I'm going to die, like, and expecting it and waiting for it. And it never happened. And then I convinced myself that, well, the poison didn't work because of some reason. And I began to realize that all these things that I was feeling and hearing and remembering weren't real. So I've never been through like a severe psychosis like it sounds like you went through, but it opened my eyes and my mind to what really being disconnected from reality feels like. And that is a scary feeling, especially once you begin to realize that a lot of what you remember isn't true, you know? And so did you have a hard time when you were coming out the other side, sort of rebuilding your perception of your reality?
Well, first of all, that's spooky what you said, because it's so similar to what I experienced. For me, they had put things in my body, listening devices, audio devices. There was poisons. Usually it was mechanical things, meaning things that were either a grain of rice transponder was a big one that was implanted in my neck. How somebody implanted a grain of rice in my neck was never made clear.
Yeah, no, you never questioned
But
that
it was
part
there.
at all.
You never questioned that part. But you know it's there.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, it's not like a you think, it's a you know.
You know, yeah, it's real. It's as real as we're sitting here. Yes. Can you repeat your question again?
Oh, when you were coming out of it and after you were starting to get clean, I mean, I don't want to jump too far ahead here, but at that point, you know, how hard was it for you to sort of come back to terms with what's real? Like, did you have to go around and ask people, you know, like, did you say this? Cause I remember doing a little bit of that, but I don't know if you went through that.
It's very, very hard. And to this day, I still haven't done it.
Oh,
I'll be honest. To this day, I still hear disembodied voices. I continue to entertain beliefs about government interest in my life. What I have learned to do is to take the ambiguous nature of what I experience, use it to my advantage. Meaning, if I believe that if I choose to believe the government has something to do with me other than, you know, IRS collecting taxes and the police of, enforcing the laws, they do. And by the way, I'm a law-abiding citizen now. I don't even use strong language.
for the record, everybody.
I obey the speed. Yeah, out of all the people that helped me, some of the most meaningful help did come from police. And I'm very grateful to the women and men in law enforcement who helped me. To get back to your question, yeah, never was I was so deep in it for so long. It was so real. Even to this day, I look at the picture in Sports Illustrated magazine that was a picture of me, a doctored picture of me, or so I thought. And even to this day, I look at that and I say, man, that's hard. Some stuff is hard to explain. And reality is such a misunderstood thing. I've listened to so many people with a great deal of wisdom who have contemplated these questions to a far greater extent than I ever have, and who impart their wisdom. The one thing that makes the most sense to me is that, going back to what we were saying, our beliefs shape our reality more so than our reality shapes our belief. I believe in God and spirituality. So while I never really resolved the 9/11 conspiracy theories, meaning I don't know if I met a hijacker, I don't know if there was something more to the psychosis than psychosis, meaning was there some element of reality? I don't know. Yet what I can control is how I choose to act upon what I believe. How I've chosen to act upon my beliefs is by volunteering in my communities. I became a volunteer first responder for the fire department. 8 years in San Francisco, I did that. So I was so afraid of the government and of law enforcement. I was terrified. And years after I quit meth, I entertained these paranoid delusions and these paranoid theories. So what I did was, Joseph Campbell, you familiar with him?
I'm not, no.
Joseph Campbell's an author. He writes, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." Right?
I like that.
Yeah, I love that. And I didn't even know the quote at the time, but that was the path I took. So I was so paranoid, so terrified of law enforcement. I decided, you know what? I'm going to partner with law enforcement.
Face your fears head on.
Yeah, I volunteered for the fire department, which I know is not law enforcement. From there, I began volunteering for the FBI. The very people I was, and once because I knew, my paths could have been, and I did choose the path of of filing FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests.
Mm-hmm.
I even hired I spent thousands of dollars on a Freedom of Information Act attorney to try to find out if I'd known this hijacker. I submitted countless FOIA requests to the CIA, the FBI, the DOD, Department of Defense, for those who may not be familiar with that acronym, the NSA. NSA is real forthcoming, as you might imagine. They're just
super.
Oh yeah, information
about their stuff. Yeah.
God.
Well, they didn't come to your house after the first time you sent them a Freedom of Information Request Act. So, and I think that's important to note, because for those listening, you would think that would tell you something, but it doesn't always necessarily, especially when you're dealing with problems with psychosis and stuff like that, or paranoia in general. Like you would think that, hey, I sent them my name and address and phone number. If they were after me, they'd probably show up yesterday. But yeah, no, I get that. I totally get that feeling. So going back, I wanted to cover, because it sounded like you had a pretty good career. You went to college as well before becoming addicted.
Yeah, I had so much, PWM, right? Privileged white male. That was me all the way.
And
socioeconomic. Yeah.
What is Gentech?
That's a biotech firm. They treated me very well. I worked there for 5 years after I graduated college. Genentech they sent me back to school. They promoted me. They gave me raises. They put me in charge of projects. I worked with senior executives on projects. They sent me overseas to Europe on business meetings. Genentech treated me very well.
What did you do for them?
I did work related to so Genentech's biotech. I did clinical research, meaning I was sort of what's the best way to describe? I would do regulatory work, meaning that basically there's a subset of biotechnology which is dedicated to protecting the welfare of human subjects of clinical trials. So right now, you might see on the news, we have, unfortunately, we have COVID right now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you've read a little bit about how people volunteered to take vaccines.
I did, yeah.
What they do is it's a little different with COVID now, because I think they have the vaccines fast-tracked, which I don't know too much about. But basically, if you bring a therapy to market, to get it through the FDA, you have to undertake a rigorous process, very long, very expensive. As well, it should be, because it's designed to protect human beings who volunteer to be the subjects of research.
So just to stop you real briefly, it sounds like you know quite a bit about vaccines. Is that safe to say, or at least the research process and the process of approval?
A little bit, because I did work. Yeah, I worked in biotech for about 12 years.
Because we have some people here who are kind of opposed to vaccines. So if you could elaborate on this, that would be fantastic.
Not my expertise. I would only reveal I'd reveal my own ignorance and little bit more.
Okay. I don't want to put you on the spot like that, but it sounds like that there is a pretty rigorous process that vaccines generally go through before getting approved to the market. Is that safe to say?
From my experience, yes, that is definitely safe to say.
Okay.
And what I can say, for all the Western medicine's done some great things for us. When it comes to trauma, there's very little that I'm aware of that's better than Western medicine when it comes to trauma in this day and age. If we experience trauma, if we get in a car accident,
we've got the gunshot victim wounds.
If you served in the military, so you know that military and I think some of the best medicine has come from the battlefield.
It has, yeah, prosthetics, everything.
Yeah, because on the battlefield they're allowed to innovate.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have to. If you don't innovate, sometimes you're going to unfortunately lose the life of a soldier, or right.
I remember the first time they told us they had this powder that they could dump on a gunshot wound that would just like burn it closed on the spot. And I was like, that's amazing. I mean, now it's common you can buy it at Walmart, I'm pretty sure nowadays, stuff like that. But at the time I was like, this is amazing. The kind of advances they've made because of that is incredible. Let's see. So
super glue, I think the super glue was originally military medicine. Yeah, it was used to seal wounds.
Now
basically super glue. Yeah, and if you I've done Yeah, I've done it. If you cut yourself, I mean, I'm not recommending it.
Yeah.
But I've cut myself and super glued cuts. So it can be done. It doesn't necessarily, if, of course, the disclaimer, always consult with your doctor before undertaking.
This is not medical advice.
This is not by no means medical advice. So while Western medicine is very good for things like trauma, at least from my perspective and my experience, I've found I've undertaken, and I did a lot of Krav Maga, which is martial arts.
Okay.
Yeah, I did a lot. I was an instructor, and I had some very good.
You were an instructor even.
I was an instructor. Yeah, that's how I got into the FBI.
Okay.
So in Krav Maga, I would get injured quite a bit because I was never really that good. I would spar a lot, but I never had skills.
Gotcha.
So I would get, I kept getting hit in the eye, and I couldn't see out of my eye for a week, and my ribs got hurt. What I discovered were things like acupuncture, homeopathy, chiropractic, preventive medicine, the value of nutrition, certainly the value of the mind. The way I discovered that healing is a skill, not so much a process. Healing is a skill. Healing is a skill. Like we can learn how to play chess. We can develop that skill. We can also learn how to heal if we undertake the same mental processes. That's what I discovered. And I was doing I was doing Krav Maga 2 or 3 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week as I was probably 40, in my mid 40s.
In your 40s. That is extra brutal.
Plus not being good.
Yeah.
and the people
hit a lot.
And the people that my fellow students were very good. A lot. My instructors were excellent. My fellow students were awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I trained with Danny Zelig, who was like a second generation from Emi Lichtenfeld, who invented Krav Maga. The point is, while Western medicine I found is very good, to give ourselves over to Western medicine as the solution for all of our problems, to me, that may be a mistake. In self-defense training, as I was a self-defense instructor, one of the most important things I learned is to never compromise your own experience and your own beliefs because a so-called master told you something different.
It makes a lot of sense.
Never set aside your own intuition. Never override your own ingrained beliefs. Consider what others say. Apply your own wisdom. Apply your own knowledge and experience. Listen to people. These are only suggestions, and if they don't make sense, that's fine. Discard what you hear from me. But never. If our experiences and we have intuition. The more we listen to our intuition, the more it tells us. And healing is a skill. Self-defense is a skill. These things, human beings evolved and survived for thousands. And what am I saying? For how many years have human beings been on that? Thousands.
I mean, humans with our current brains, I think, have been around for about 72,000 years now, 70,000 years. So, yeah. Right. And you're right. When you say it's a learned skill, healing being a learned skill, that was something that going through therapy actually taught me, was that it's a process, like it requires certain tools and it requires certain knowledge, and using those tools and knowledge, you can keep yourself in a relatively healthy mindset and place. And I think that applies to what you're saying pretty accurately. I don't know. What do you think?
You read much Joe Dispenza? I
do not. No, I haven't.
You might like Joe Dispenza's quantum physics. He marries.
Let me write that down.
Science. Yeah. Check him out. He marries ancient science with cutting edge quantum physics. And
interesting.
And he gives, it's like you say, there's our minds are incredible machines. Our brains are incredible machines, and the mind, they've discovered, do you know, if you take an atom, an atom, the basic building block of all matter, if you take
I'm a huge science nerd, just for the record.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So you know that in the center of an atom is a nucleus.
Right.
And around the nucleus is an electron.
Yes, sir.
If you took the nucleus of an atom and made it the size of an SUV, right?
Okay.
Relatively, an electron would be the size of a pea, and the space they occupied would be the size of 2 islands of Cuba.
Really?
So an atom is almost all empty space. It's far more than 99% empty space. Since atoms make molecules, molecules make chemicals, chemicals make things like cells, cells make tissue, tissue makes organs, organs make people. When you build up from that empty space that compromises an atom, we are almost all empty space. We're matter. We're made of, that's definitely true, but we are much more energy. So what, Dana, is that energy?
Dark energy.
I may very well be.
That's all we know. Like, there's something that makes up the space between space, but we really don't know much more than that at this point. And yeah, I think the scale, I think we forget. I mean, I know this is a bit off topic for our podcast, but it just always, I love to talk about stuff like this. The fact that we're huge. Like humans, we may seem small in comparison to the universe, but on the scale of how small things are, we are massive beings. Like, especially like you were describing, you know, if the nucleus of a atom is the size of an SUV to 2 Cubas, you know, we are freaking huge beings. But also it's important to note that based on that knowledge, you know, not everything is always what it seems to be. And as a result, it's important to look deeper into the meaning of things. And I think that's where spirituality and things like keeping an open mind when it comes to homeopathic medicine, in addition to standard Western medicine, really plays a strong role in keeping us sane as beings. You know, there's just so much more out there than we know.
There's so much more out there, and you said it so well. Spirituality. To me, that's the cornerstone. Had I not undertaken a search for God as I understand God, had I not begun reading spiritual texts and hanging out with faith-based communities, from the Hare Krishnas to the Hasidic Jews and everywhere in between, everyone I talked to, everyone I met from every faith-based community had something to impart upon me. So many people were awesome and amazing. Of course, there were some people whom, you know, I didn't particularly vibe with, but that's okay. The point is, when I undertook that deep search for spiritual meaning, that led me to things like Joe Dispenza and my realization that Western medicine, it's good for a lot of things, but just like you say, there's much more to it. And our minds are huge. What do they say? The mind is as vast as the universe. You know, outer space is endless, and inner space is endless too.
I was watching a PBS Space Time. You ever watch that on YouTube?
No, but it sounds fascinating.
It's a very interesting thing. It's an online space show where that PBS runs, and last night's episode was we can see we can remember the past. How come we can't remember the future? And they started talking about how brains work and the quantum wave functions and the collapses and stuff like that. And they're like, you know, so theoretically there's no reason that we shouldn't be able to see the future in the same way that we see the past. And since time is relative in that sense, I don't know, he can explain it way better than I can. But with that in mind, like, God, the things that we're learning nowadays about how the universe works are truly amazing. Do you prescribe to aliens? Is that too paranoid for you?
No, there's very little that's too paranoid for me to at least consider. I'm certain. I mean, I see things all the time that are. I believe there's much more to reality than we allow ourselves to believe or are led to believe. The way I like to think about it is, do you remember the movie Gorillas in the Mist?
I do not, no.
Okay. So do you recall Diane Fossey, is that her name? She studied gorillas in their natural habitats.
Yeah, the one who like lived with the gorillas and stuff like that.
She lived with the gorillas. So what she would do is, if I recall the movie correctly, and if the movie accurately reflects her life story, she would observe the gorillas from a distance.
Okay.
Right? And the gorillas would notice her, yet they would have to go back to things like foraging and raising their young, and they would kind of ignore. Then she moved in a little bit closer, And now the gorillas kind of look and they say, oh, there's some, but again, the gorillas they have to go back to feeding themselves and forming their community. So this repeats and repeats until she is part of the gorilla tribe or the gorilla family. And I believe there are things like that. And I'm not necessarily, there may be aliens. There may very well be. I don't know. I've never had any direct experience of aliens. But I absolutely believe there may be. I certainly believe there are things like angels. There are maybe interdimensional beings. There are forces. There's the Christ consciousness. There's the Buddha. There are absolutely, to my way of thinking, there are things that, like Diane Fossey, and I hope I'm getting her name right, like she immersed herself in the gorilla families, so much so that ultimately they really considered her a gorilla, right? There are things like angels that are such part of our lives, yet we go about our daily business that we have to feed ourselves. We have to put roofs over our head. There are angels or interdimensional beings or things in our life or God or the Buddha, or whatever you choose to believe in. You know, your beliefs are just as good as mine, if not better. And there are these forces that act upon us. Quantum, or we can call it the quantum reality or the quantum field. There are these things. I don't understand it, but you don't, as you know, Dana, you don't live in a car for 6 months. You don't sink into methamphetamine psychosis for years without taking a little bit of time to consider the nature of reality.
Yeah.
And what I mean. So your story is so powerful because you've had a chance to really look at life and look at the world from a perspective that most people. I never lived in a car for 6 months.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I've been homeless briefly. I only spent a few nights in homeless shelters. I know, man. I mean, homelessness might be a step up from jail, but from my perspective, it's a very small step up.
God,
you are such an amazing individual. You are so admirable for many things, especially for having overcome those circumstances, man. A lot of people don't come back from where you were. So the fact that you're not only doing that, not only have you come back from homelessness, but now look at you. You've got this amazing podcast where you're in service to others, where you're sharing stories, where you're giving people platforms to better themselves and hopefully contribute something to the world around them. Speak so highly to all that you've accomplished, man.
Oh, well, thank you. That's what I've realized. I've been through so many hard situations in my life. I was 16 years old and I was basically living on the streets at that point. I wouldn't come home. My stepdad was very abusive. I dealt with sexual abuse when I was a real small kid. After all the things and I've done, all the places I've been, all the people I've met, all the things I've seen, from being in crack dens to seeing what true unchained humans look like, the people who don't live in a regular society. I have seen and witnessed so much that if there's anything I can do in this world, I want it to be meaningful and purposeful, because otherwise there's no point in being here to me. If I don't have the opportunity to, even if I don't have a huge audience, even if I can't really make a huge impact on people's lives, I want people to have that platform and have this opportunity, so I'm hoping that I can bring that to them. And I hope that your story can also touch people, because we haven't even gotten to really you recovering yet, coming out the other side. So really back on that track where you mentioned that, that officer, the first time you got arrested. Now, have you been arrested more than once?
I would get arrested. Yeah, I've been arrested several times. I've only done a couple of stretches in jail, and they were very brief. I mean, one was 60 days. The other time I got arrested, I was breaking into my relative's home to steal something to pawn for meth money. I did it once, smoked all the meth, came back the second day, attempted another break-in. The cops arrested me. I refused to cooperate, instead demanding an audience with the FBI, thinking that I was, I don't know, an undercover FBI operative or something. The cops stripped me naked, put me in a padded cell, for 24 hours or something like that. Still, I refused cooperation. From there, the cops incarcerated me in a psych ward. And I should say, today, I'm very grateful to those cops because they were looking after my safety. You know, if I'd gone in a GP, if I'd gone in a general population talking about undercover FBI, that's not a safe, that's not a safe scene, Matt. No, that wouldn't have been.
60 days is not a short stint, by the way. I mean, in my opinion.
I would, yeah, it's any time in jail is too long, especially when it can be avoided, which is, I guess, kind of a ridiculous thing to say. But I guess what I mean is when we as a society have other options, such as treatment for addiction, when we have means of community service, when we have, I know an incredible guy right out here near me in Seabrook, New Hampshire. What he will do is the criminal justice system will send him defendants instead of jail, and he will take them to do things like serve community dinners at a church near where he lives, or he will bring people into assisted living. And so instead of sitting in jail, someone will be going into an assisted living facility, helping an elderly person, whatever, paint their fingernails.
Do you think that stuff helps with most people?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't think it helps. I think in the cases it doesn't help, I think it probably hurts less than jail.
That's fair.
Or prison.
Yeah.
I want to also be very respectful to victims, because there are victims whose lives have been destroyed by criminal actions. I do not by any means intend a blanket endorsement of all. What I don't mean, people like me, we made poor choices and we took actions that hurt others. And I do not condone those actions. I don't condone criminal actions like the ones I undertook. And I committed many, many felonies before I ever got busted. Again, because I'm privileged and I'm a white male, and that society gave me unfair advantages. But the point is, I feel we can better, in some cases, and maybe even in many cases, we can better serve victims of crime, as well as persons who commit criminal acts, as well as society, if we take a closer look at how to prevent crime in the future.
What's your thoughts on that? Because I did want to ask you about that here today. You've been through a very unique set of circumstances and come out the other side of this. What would have helped you back then?
What would have helped me was faith, was belief in God. What would have helped me was certainly self-confidence. My dream since I was a kid was to be a writer, yet I never had the confidence in myself. I never believed in myself that I was worth pursuing my dream until years and years and years went by. What would have helped me was, was really just to believe in myself, believe that I could accomplish my dreams, that my dreams were worthwhile. And really, it boils down to faith. It boils down to me, spirituality. It's like George Harrison said. Remember, you might be a little young, but George Harrison of the Beatles? Yeah. So George Harrison says, everything can wait. He said, he's passed away. George Harrison said, everything can wait except the search for God. Right?
Powerful.
And George Harrison was in the Beatles, which was, the Beatles were considered by many, or are considered by many, to be among the greatest rock and roll bands in history. George Harrison is saying that even the heights of rock and roll stardom can wait, but that search for God cannot wait. Had I believed that starting when I was a young child, I would have understood that all those other things are important: college, family, career, all those things are important, and much more is important. Yet all of that can wait. That search for God cannot wait. Even in a dire emergency, a few seconds of prayer a few seconds or an instant of turning to God, even in the most, and I don't know if this is your experience serving in the military and having been through what you've been through. I would like to be able to go back. If I had to go back and change something, I would like to change myself as a child to following that path that George Harrison and others put forth. But everything's important, or many things are important, but they all can wait. Put that
That's
search
true.
for spiritual meaning first and foremost. That's what I would like to do over again.
For my personal experience, you know, I never found God in that sense. It wasn't necessarily faith in something, because what I realized was that we need faith. Well, yeah, I'm sorry, I misworded that. We need faith in something. We have to have some purpose for living, and we have to have some reason for existing and something to live for. And whether it's God, or whether it's helping others, or whether it's flipping burgers at McDonald's, like you have to have something that makes you want to be here and want to try to succeed for yourself. And without that, I don't think anybody can. So I know I'd say 95% of people find God in that, for that, you know, and it provides them that sense of community, and it provides them that sense of solidarity and the sense of purpose and the hope for the afterlife. And I don't bash anybody who's religious or anything like that. But for me personally, I was able to find a lot of those same traits just through the existing, through the existence of people. You know, we're all here together, and I hedge my bets in a sense because of that. You know, it's like, if there is no God, then there wouldn't be a purpose in living for God. Therefore, I might as well find another reason that's good to live for. And if that abides by God's will, in a sense, like, I try to be a good person, you know, I try to do unto others as I would do, or as I would like to have done to me. I try to live a life that follows the 10 commandments anyway, you know, but I may not prescribe to the religion because of it. You know, it's just, to me, it's all about doing right by others. And that's really what the religion boils down to, in my opinion, just at its root. So I'm sorry, I don't like to have huge religious debates, because it can always be a hot topic. And it's not a debate, man. It's all about, like you said earlier, you know, reality is perception. And I've said that for years. What you believe to be true is what's true. And the world around us is painted by that picture, our own personal beliefs and our own personal experiences. So, I just want to keep it moving along here, because I don't know how much time you have left. After
I got time.
I got time.
And
okay.
Oh yeah, I got time. And you know, somebody asked the Dalai Lama, you know, talking about religion.
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked the Dalai Lama, and here's a good lesson about religion that I learned. Here's the way I really learned to view religion, was from this question that was posed to the Dalai Lama. The question was, what is the best religion? Okay. So the questioner thinks, the questioner thinks the Dalai Lama is going to say Buddhism, because Buddhism's the oldest or something. Yet the response from the Dalai Lama is, the best religion is the one that makes the practitioner the best person.
I like that.
Right? The best, the most grateful, the kindest. So to me, Dana, you have just outlined what is the best religion. It might be flipping burgers at McDonald's. That could be the best. Or you know, the 10 commandments or the golden rule as you interpret them and you apply them, or as you choose to interpret and apply them to your life. That is the best religion, is making you the best person you can be. It doesn't mean, you know, my view of faith is not for me to say that there is one correct system of beliefs is like saying there's one correct favorite color.
Yeah, that's what it feels like to me too, you know?
Yeah.
So,
and if there is such a thing as a God doesn't care if I can't believe that God, if we're compassionate and we love others and we forgive and we help the sick and the needy, I can't believe that God cares whether we do it under the banner of Islam or Christianity or Buddhism or flipping burgers at McDonald's. I can't believe that God's going to discriminate, so long as we are being the best people we can, or at least striving towards that. I love what you're saying. I love it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I feel exactly the same. I do. So it's cool to see that we meet eye to eye on that. Uh, so what got you? What happened in life? So you were drinking as a teen, and then you ended up hooked on drugs. And I'm just trying to bridge that gap. Like, what happened there that caused that? How did it start? Like, were you at a friend's house?
Well, it started because I didn't have a solution to my problems. Today I have a solution. That solution is spirituality. When I was a kid, I had all these problems. I mean, to me, as a privileged kid, my problems with things like the popular girl wouldn't talk to me. The bullies picked on me. Those, I know those aren't real problems. Real problems are.
I gotta disagree with you on that. I'm sorry to cut you off, but
Yeah.
this is something that I talk to a lot of younger people on Twitch. It's mostly audience 13 to 18, and something that I've come to realize is that when you haven't experienced what you and I would call real problems, like watching friends die and stuff like that, those problems are equally as real, in my opinion. They may not be real in the grand sense of things, but to that individual who's going through that pain, I think it is 100% as real. I mean, and I just want to preface that because I don't want to downplay what you were going through as a kid. If you felt that that was the biggest problem in the world, then it was to you, in the same way that reality is perception,
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that. Yeah, it reminds me of the concept of dukkha in Buddhism.
Dukkha.
Dukkha.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, no. Well, I have a very limited grasp on this concept, but I believe dukkha means sadness, and that, like you're saying, your sadness and my sadness, they're not greater or worse. We're connected as humans because we experience sadness. So I like what you're saying. I like what you're saying. I think that, and I think when so my problems, well, I guess looking at it that way, my problems to me were quite serious, in that I felt, when you think about it, now that I'm turning over your wonderful insights in my mind, I'm realizing that my problems were I could not connect to other human beings, which is a very serious problem, because you not being able to connect to other humans, that is basically an existential fear.
Certainly.
When we, in our prehistoric days, we had to be a member of a clan or a tribe or a family, right? A human
We
being
just wouldn't
on his
survive.
own or her own. Yeah, in our prehistoric times, you could not be out on your own. You would suffer a certain slow, painful death. So, and this is one thing we learn in self-defense training: the phenomenon of how ingrained belonging is. So, I guess my problems were of an existential nature. My fears were of an existential nature. In that, when I was a kid, I couldn't connect. I felt I couldn't connect to others. The way I solved that was through heavy drinking and later heavy drug use, because it wasn't really the feeling of getting drunk or getting high. When I got high, I almost always didn't like being high, because I would get so high that I couldn't talk to people. I would get if I was smoking a lot of marijuana, I would be so paranoid. If I would every time I did coke, I did a lot of coke, and almost every time I did coke, I would end up by myself and even if I was with someone, even if I was with a girlfriend or something, I was still by myself, if you know what I mean.
I do.
Meaning that I was so in my head and in my paranoia that every night, every time I'd binge on cocaine, I ended up by myself, believing the cops were coming to smash through my windows, having repelled from helicopters, or kick down my door and drag me off. And at the same time, I believed my heart was going to explode. So my enemies were outside and inside. My heart was going to stop and the cops were going to come in. This was these were the ways I dealt with my problems, because cocaine, and later meth, above all, gave me a way to connect to people. Here I am. Now I'm someone special. I got a talent, man. I know the phone number to call. I know the lingo to use. I know the garage to hang out in. I know the strip clubs. I could go to a strip
club.
The people, the drug culture, hanging out in strip clubs on Tuesday afternoons. Um, being at the DMV, smoking a joint in the parking lot, or
Hmm.
smoking a joint in the fast food line drive-through.
It's a way to find a sense of belonging,
It's a
and it,
sense of belonging.
yeah, and that can
It
be
absolutely.
dangerous if it's a unhealthy activity. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
I have a story along those lines because this isn't one I talk about on stream almost ever. But when I was 11, I was arrested for animal abuse, and it wasn't because of anything I did. It was because this kid that I hung out with, who I didn't know any better, he would go out behind his house and like torture snakes and kill them and stuff like that. And I knew he did it, and I would go out there and hang out with him sometimes while he was doing it because I had no friends, and I'd been homeschooled for the last 2 years. I had no way to connect with people, and nobody else would talk to me because I was that weird homeschooled kid, And as a result, it's kind of amazing, who you'll end up hanging out with just for that social validation and where you'll end up taking your life. It sounds like in your case that's where it took you. You were looking for that social validation, and then the people you found it from were just not the best people.
They were not making the best decisions. Absolutely. What you say rings very true. I was an animal abuser.
Mm.
I was, and I was in my 30s. I had this beautiful dog, this incredible, wonderful animal, Mickey. I think, guess we were talking about how when I got arrested,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
This was my dog. So, Mickey, all he wanted to do was to love me. And I would leave him in his crate for hours by himself when I was out scoring meth, doing whatever. I struck him, several times. I would grab him and shake him by the scruff because I was at the core. The reason, and there's no excuse, but the reason is when I was a kid, I saw my childhood dog get run over right in front of me. Oh, it
Oh.
was a nightmare, man. It was terrible. So I guess I was scared if Mickey didn't obey me, he might get run over too. So that was a true source of shame for me, and it was a way too, I guess, of distancing myself from humanity as I did more shameful things, which I did many things for which I was ashamed through the course of my drug addiction. Who wants to deal with that, man? Who wants to wake up being the person who abuses a dog? Who wants to wake up being the person who fuels the methamphetamine industry? Because not to get judgmental, but I think it's hard to dispute the fact that the methamphetamine industry contributes to toxins in the environment, right? The
Mm-hmm.
byproducts of meth production. Um, we know that the methamphetamine industry has victims, or at least I feel that's I
Well,
feel
yeah. I
that's
mean, what is it? AstraZeneca or what's the Pfizer? Was it Pfizer that was sued? Who's gonna? I think the first $8 billion OxyContin settlement just came through. Something like that. I can't remember the details, but
yeah.
did you hear about this recently?
I've heard something like that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they
It's
knowingly and willfully they were paying kickbacks to doctors to get OxyContin on the streets more. Yeah, it was a huge problem, and it was a knowingly done and intentional problem. And I know you're talking more about meth labs run out of houses. It sounds like, but
yeah.
it all started, I
Kind of
think, with
sounds kind of like it's sort of hypocritical, like you're
yeah,
saying.
oh yeah,
That meth is illegal, whereas companies like Pfizer operate or are supposed to operate legitimately.
mm-hmm.
And how we view, what Pfizer, the opioid addiction. At the height of the epidemic, more people were dying of opioid overdoses than in 1 month than were killed on 9/11.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Each month we were losing more people and these are beautiful people, man. These are not, you look at a person, and I've done it too. I've judged people based on their appearance, but we lost millions of beautiful people who could have gone on to contribute at least as much as me to society, if
and
not far
families
more.
destroyed.
Families
And
destroyed.
the scary
Yeah.
part too is a lot of it wasn't even what See, and this is where bias comes in, and I think it's important to note my bias here, because my initial thought is it wasn't even just like derelict people on the streets getting hooked on heroin. It was, you know, regular soccer moms and stuff who just didn't know any better. But that cued me in instantly that I think of it in that terms, you know, like one person is less deserving of avoiding heroin addiction, you know? So I want to bring up that was my initial, thought of like two groups of people, like normal people and then those guys. You know, it's important to avoid those types of assumptions, I think, because having been homeless, that was something that I realized, you know, like you're still a person, you're still a human, you're still somebody who matters, you still have a family, and you still have, you know, kids, or you still have, like in my case, I was working, I even had a job. I just couldn't, I was given so much money away to my ex that I couldn't afford to get an apartment. And that was where eventually I had to make a decision and stop doing that. But yeah, you know, it was worth it to me at the time to provide her that assistance over me getting an apartment, you know? So anyway, yeah, I wanted to talk too about coming out of this, because, you know, that's the bright side of all of this. You finally got clean at some point. Tell me about what that process was like.
Yeah, that process, I spent my final devastating year of meth addiction living in a flophouse hotel in the North Beach area of San Francisco. North Beach is famed for the Beat Generation, Jack Kerouac, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, those guys. North Beach is also known for the strip clubs and the and people like, or people engaged in activities like I was, which is a lot of, I was using a lot of meth. I mean, North Beach is not known for meth or anything like that. The point is, I spent this year in North Beach, San Francisco, and I could have pursued a life of appreciating things like Jack Kerouac, people like Jack Kerouac and his writing. Instead, I was smoking a lot of meth. I lived in this little hotel with a sink in the corner where I'd ash my cigarettes, wash my clothes, and urinate.
All in the sink?
All in this one sink. I hadn't showered or brushed my teeth in months. It's, you know, the disembodied voices were coming to get me. I remember I had this glass ashtray, and I'd stay up all night trying to make meth. I was practicing alchemy. You know, I had these gold cufflinks and batteries,
God,
and
yeah.
These are the things. I used to write letters.
That's the meth stuff that people don't hear about, you know?
Oh, yeah.
The tweaker stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, you get some weird. And what I would do too is write letters to. I was the lost son of John Lennon.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah, I was the child of John Lennon and I think Princess Margaret. Yeah, thank you. This is, you know, someday I'll assume my rightful position as the heir to the throne of the British Empire.
I'll wave a flag for you.
Yeah. Well, but I would, you know, I believe this, and you know, the voices were telling me this, and it was so, you know, something in the mind of someone in psychosis, something has got to explain these disembodied. You know, we hear these voices, and we see these things and these people. Something's got to be. There's got to be some reason. For me, it was the 9/11 hijacker. And then other things too. So I would write letters to the State Department, the U.S. State, and then there was an office, a State Department, like they have a police service, diplomatic services in the State Department. So I would go down there at 2 a.m. and slide letters under the door of the office building. I
wonder who knows about these places other than people in meth psychosis. Like I don't think I've ever been to that office or knew it existed. So I wonder just what percentage of people are that contact them are going through some sort of issues like that.
There's probably, yeah. I've talked to some FBI people, and you know, the FBI people I've talked to are actually, and I say actually because I would not have believed this, there are some very sympathetic people in the FBI. There are people in the who they're like you, you know, they're like you and I, Dana. They don't know what to do. When somebody shows up, like I would show up high on meth, talking about FBI conspiracies or FBI help me. The FBI wants to help them, but you know, they don't know how do you manage someone who's in a position like I was in, and that's one thing that struck me about the FBI when I actually started sitting down with their with their agents, with their executives, with their staff. After, of course, I got clean off meth.
Mhm.
They're, whenever we connect to somebody on a human to human level, an organization is what it is, but a person working within an organization is different. That's what I discovered when I started sitting down with FBI people and people in the police department, and certainly when I began volunteering, going inside prisons and coaching incarcerated persons in employment and entrepreneurism, as I ended up doing. When I started seeing the humanity in people, whether they were people in the police or people in prison, I learned, we are in many, many ways similar. If, I've sat down face to face with a guy in the BGF, the Black Guerrilla family, who served many years in prison. I sat down with guys who came up through the Crips, the Bloods, the AB, the Aryan Brotherhood. And then I've sat down with executives at very high levels in the FBI. We all want the same things in many ways. And when we're able to form these human connections, we are truly able to get to a point where we can believe in the good that's possible for our communities.
I agree with that. The way you describe that, I think, is so poignant. The people that I've met, because when you're talking about meeting with the Aryan Brotherhood and the Black Guerrilla members, it made me recall this Crip I knew from L.A. Not in prison. He was just a associate of mine at the time, and I remember him coming to my room one night and just crying for like 20 minutes. And I've seen this dude beat the crap out of people. I've seen him fight with cops. I've seen him do all this other stuff. And then he came in my room one night and he was crying because he was lonely. He's like, dude, I don't want my life to be this way. I don't this isn't how I want to live. This is like, I'm never going to get a girlfriend at a job. But, the next day he goes back to doing meth and goes back to being himself. But like, it made me realize, I'm like, it doesn't matter who you are or where you're from in this world. Like, whether you're a police officer, who I worked with plenty while I was in the military, and also gave me this sort of perspective from their side of them being human. Yeah, we're all just people. We are. Yeah. We're all people who chose a different path in life, and some of us chose, poorly. Some of us didn't have the information available or the resources available to make a smarter decision at the time anyway. At some point in our life, we all get presented with the idea that, hey, maybe this is wrong and this is bad. Don't do this. And not everybody picks that up at the same time. But
this guy in the Crips, let me guess, he was an intelligent person.
He was a fairly intelligent guy. Yeah.
Person,
he didn't act very
obviously
intelligent.
Sensitive.
But yeah,
he didn't might have acted. Yeah.
Yeah.
Intelligent person, wisdom, maybe if not book learning, wisdom.
Yeah, he definitely
had insights into human nature, observant. You could observe human behavior and draw insightful conclusions.
He was. And when we had that conversation that night, it was a totally different person than the person that I saw day to day from him, and seeing that side come out.
You know what we need to, what we should do as a society, if we really want to implement better community relations with police, lower crime, and keep our streets safer. So what we do is we implement a program, okay? Mm-hmm. And every police officer is paired with a community leader. Okay, so you got every cop is paired with a community leader. 4 hours each month. 4 hours each month. Mm-hmm. The community leader goes on a ride along with the cop. And for 4 hours, that same cop volunteers in the community leader's whatever, homeless shelter or assisting victims of human trafficking or any number of things. And when those 4 hours a month, and they, there's compensated, we have a program, they get compensated or paid, or the matching donations to police officers association or charities. And when those two individuals start getting that relatively small amount of immersion in each other's worlds, when the communities that the leader serves sees a cop on her own time or on his own time, volunteering, serving meals or packing grocery bags or whatever, when the community sees that leader in a patrol car getting out there, and when they can experience each other's worlds, they will form that human connection, just like you're talking about.
Oh,
And we will start
yeah.
seeing things, and we'll start understanding that, it's not, we'll start looking, what I found is that behind bars and behind badges beat the hearts of human beings. And when we live that, when we understand that, when we accept as our reality that within our prisons or behind the walls of our prisons, we can find women and men who truly deserve to be walking the streets free. Maybe not all of them, but we can find behind our prison walls women and men who deserve to be free. And we can also find behind the wheels of our squad cars women and men who truly do deserve to be entrusted with protecting our streets. And when we can form those human connections, I'll tell you, man, it got me from a point, in my life, it manifested from a point of being absolutely certain that the FBI was throwing incredible amounts of resources towards my destruction because of a 9/11 conspiracy. I was sure of that. I mean, they were putting pictures of me in Sports Illustrated magazine. You know how much effort that must take? When I got from that point to volunteering for the FBI, to standing on a stage at the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., shaking hands with the FBI director and receiving his community service award, if that mindset of human to human connection, if it got me from where I was 13 years ago to where I am today, it can work in the lives of others too.
That's well said. And God, tell me you put that quote somewhere: from behind bars to behind badges beats the heart of a human. That needs to be in the front of your book, man.
Like that.
Somewhere in there. That's perfect. That's well said. Geez. So after getting clean, you did mention, we've talked a little bit about that. You do some community service. Tell me a little bit about that work that you do now, or have done since then, I should say.
Most of it. So I started out with things like a first responder for the fire department. And what I learned to do is volunteer wherever I could. I volunteered for the SPCA, collecting donations outside of Macy's at holiday time. I volunteered in the homeless shelter where I used to eat, serving meals in a soup kitchen. I would just volunteer wherever I could. Eventually, because I had been in the first responder program, I approached an FBI guy whom happened to be my student in Krav Maga. Right. And this FBI guy was on the SWAT team. I made it known to him that, and again, because I knew him as a human being. We both worked out in the same Krav gym. I was his instructor. He was my fellow student. So we made that human to human connection. I made it known to him I wanted to volunteer for the Bureau the same way I'd volunteered for the fire department. He helped me organize an unarmed self-defense training for some guys in the FBI SWAT team. So here I am, because I had been, the guys who would have come to kick down my door would have been the SWAT team.
Yeah.
In my paranoid fantasies.
What a turn.
Now, here I am I'm their instructor now.
Yeah.
They nominated me to something called the Citizens Academy. Very selective.
What is that?
This is a program where, it's a program whereby they take civilians such as myself, but mostly they're civilians who work in public safety, or, one of my fellow students was a volunteer for an organization that serves victims of sex trafficking. There were several representatives from the Muslim community, and it's a little academy that they put us through. It's one night a week for 6 weeks where they teach us how the FBI fulfills its mission of protecting Americans. Some of it is things like evidence collection, and if you see a footprint, how to take a plaster cast of a footprint. And then we got to go out on the firing range and see some cool. Like a bomb display. It was really cool. Yeah, we saw a bomb. They have this amazing bomb disposal where they have an X-ray and a different. They can shoot out there's 3 components of a bomb. You might know this from the there's the.
Oh, they didn't teach us about that, but yeah, I have a general idea.
There's the explosive device, there's the timer, and there's a What's the other part?
Detonators?
I'm gonna butcher it if I try to explain. I remember there are three. One's the explosive. Okay. One is the anyway. So they can look at it from a distance and they can shoot out one of the three. Right. So the other two are preserved so they can examine it and find any evidence so they can prevent.
Yeah. Don't they use water for that? I'd heard something like
that's
they use high pressure water.
Yeah. They use water. They use water and they shot it out. Yeah.
Cool.
So the point is, so we learned that the technical aspects of the FBI, even more so than that, the FBI becomes demystified. All right. So now we have FBI executives standing in front of the class saying, yeah, the FBI has made mistakes. We know that the FBI history is not perfect, yet here's what the Bureau is doing to improve. They have things like victims assistance, which I never knew. They have things like they have an outreach program to combat opioid addiction, like you and I were just talking about. So they do they have a film called Chasing the Dragon, which puts forth the dangers of opioid abuse. They do things, and basically the access I got to the FBI was really, really remarkable. During the
access,
academy,
like the ability to walk through the buildings, or what are you describing?
Oh no,
there?
although I was able to do that, it's more so I got emails from FBI people.
Okay.
And when I send them emails, they will respond back to me.
I gotcha. Okay.
And of course, it's all we're on it's all for a purpose, and that purpose is to form bridges of trust between the Bureau and communities they serve. So my role is to help the FBI better serve communities affected by incarceration and addiction. So what I would do, for example, is there was an FBI guy who did community outreach. I introduced him to a couple of formerly incarcerated persons. It's an amazing experience for me to sit down with one dude here he was in the Army. He was a tank commander in the Army. Now he's in the Bureau. Okay. Over here on my right, then on my left is a good friend of mine who served 29 years in prison. I think they tried him on the death penalty, if I'm not mistaken. He served. So to be there, and I didn't say very much, but to hear these guys interacting, and the formerly incarcerated guy is he's a little bit critical of the FBI at times, which is his right to be. And the FBI guy accepts the criticism and says, and to see this interaction, these two part as friends, as colleagues, that's just a beautiful thing, and speaks so highly to the FBI, but also to my friend who'd served the 29 years in prison.
What a sight.
It's an amazing thing, man. It really is. And for me to play some small role in that, it just, it goes back to what you were saying about purpose in life. Our purpose could be to feed our family. It could be to flip burgers. It could be to put roofs over our head. There's no purpose that's higher, except when it comes to higher versus what else I was doing. So there's a higher purpose for me, but it's only as compared to what I want to do and who I was and where I want to get. My higher and your isn't higher than your higher. It's just higher. It's just my evolution and my growth. Fortunately, and very, very ironically, the FBI played and the cops and the police departments and the military played a very significant role in my development. And it's just, it's like going back to Joseph Campbell, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. The FBI were the people I was most afraid of. And thanks so much to them and to our incarcerated sisters and brothers who shared their experiences with me. The ones I most feared truly did provide the treasure which I most sought.
God, that is an incredible story, Ed. I love to see where you've come, and now you're an author. Tell us a little bit about your book, if you could.
Yeah. My book, basically readers get an in-depth look at the root causes behind drug addiction. Readers get a gripping, one-of-a-kind story of second chances and transformation. Readers get hope that redemption is possible in their own lives and in the lives of their loved ones. Readers get insights into law enforcement, criminal justice reform, the possibilities for each. Readers get a good friend of mine, James Nestor, whose book is doing very well now. It's called Breath. And I'm just trying to remember what James said. He gave me a great endorsement. And he said it's a roller coaster of a ride, a visceral experience. And James so kindly goes on to say that, I made it out the other side and am able to reflect back and bring the reader something of value from my having journeyed through, I think what James put it as is Dante's Inferno, or some version thereof. This is what readers get.
Awesome.
You will never, you as a reader will never be addicted to methamphetamine, I hope, and you will never be in methamphetamine psychosis. You will never have a 9/11 conspiracy targeting you. You will never, these things you won't experience. Yet you can learn lessons from these things by seeing them through my mind. That's what you get with my book. You also get the opportunity to donate to Defy Ventures, which is a nonprofit that provides entrepreneur and employment training to people who are currently and formerly incarcerated. The 10% of my book's profits go to Defy Ventures. We've also donated 450 copies of my book to incarcerated persons, and we're looking at donating more in the future. So you will be supporting all of that.
That's beautiful, man. That's beautiful. What do you have to say for people out there who may be struggling with addiction right this moment?
Consider God, find God, and you may very well have had negative experiences with faith-based communities, you may have negative associations with God. That's fair. These are your experiences. Do not discount them. Your suggestion, for what it's worth, and if anything you hear from me makes sense, that's great. If nothing you're about to hear makes any sense, that's fine too. Discard what you hear from me in favor of what does make sense. The pursuit of God means being more in tune with God, not necessarily being more in tune with other human beings who also believe in God. Right? Or to put it another way, a good friend of mine who is Christian says that being Christian is not about being like other Christians. It's about being like Christ. All right. And another guy, I saw a great speaker, and he was talking about Christ, and he was saying that, hey, I believe in Jesus, but I'm not Christian. This is what the speaker was saying. And he was talking, whatever, if there is such a thing as God exists inside of you. You don't necessarily need pastors, rabbis. You don't need Ed Kressy, certainly. you don't. These things can be fine. Maybe the pastors and rabbis more so than Ed Kressy. But these things are these individuals in the spiritual text. That's great. You can learn from these things. If God is real, and if you choose to believe some form of God exists, you can find God within yourself. There's a great writing from C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis writes that to speak of a human being searching for God is like speaking of a mouse searching for the cat. Right? A mouse doesn't have to go. All a mouse has to do is run around on the floor, and the cat will find it.
That's true.
If there is such a thing as God, God doesn't make hard terms with those of us who search. God doesn't require us to read thousands of pages of spiritual text. God doesn't require us to put ourselves through rigorous trials. I mean, these things can be part of the search. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them, but just remember, search for God, search for spiritual meaning, understand that this meaning does not make hard terms with you.
Yeah, finding faith. It's not about, finding a church or a pastor you like. I think you're putting that very well. It's about finding that faith that exists within yourself, and whatever you call that. Certainly, I want to apply it to people out there who may not be religious too, because that's a powerful. Your message is powerful, and I want to make sure people understand that too. So
what Gandhi said when he was asked if he was Hindu?
What did he say?
He said, "Yes, I'm also Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, and yes, yeah. So and Jewish.
I get it.
So
that's a great way of putting it.
Gandhi wrote that all religions are one road. I think that's what he wrote, or all religions form one road. And I think of, when I think of the teachers, I think of people like Gandhi and the Dalai Lama and Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela. If it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. These folks, I think, had things pretty well figured out as much as we can in our human forms. So, I read something by the Dalai Lama or Gandhi or MLK, and I think, yeah, that if I can apply that in my life, or George Harrison, there's some good teachings out there, and we don't need 1,000 teachings. Sometimes you just need a couple. You know what I think about a
just
lot
the
is
right one is the most important.
Just need the right one. And there's Dalai Lama wrote, or he said, in the practice of tolerance, one's enemy is the best teacher. I like that. That's just, for some reason, that sprang to mind just now.
That's something deep to say. That one more time here.
In the practice of tolerance, one's enemy is the best teacher.
I like that.
Yeah,
that gives you a lot to think about there.
We were saying in the beginning that it's how we choose to see things.
Mm-hmm.
We could choose to see the enemy as a terrible affliction, or we could choose, like the Dalai Lama saying, to see the enemy as a teacher of perseverance. And then there's a quote attributed to the Buddha, which I kind of researched, and I don't know if it actually is from the Buddha, but it's still, I think, a good quote. It's better to conquer oneself than to win 1,000 battles.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's more valuable. It really is. Because what's important, if you win 1,000 battles but still haven't figured yourself out, what was it all for?
What's it all for? Yeah.
That's well said. Well, Ed, if anybody in chat has any questions for anybody hanging out there, go ahead and ask them in chat now, because we're going to be wrapping this up pretty quick. But Ed, your book, My Addiction and Recovery, just because you're done with drugs doesn't mean drugs are done with you. Where can people buy that?
You can find it anywhere books are sold. Amazon. Amazon's good. You can go to my website. Kindle? Kindle. You can get Kindle paperback.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. On your website too. Yeah. Tell us about your website, socials, everywhere you want people to find you.
My name's pretty unique. If you just look up Ed Kressy, EdKressy, you can find me on Facebook. If certainly, and most importantly, if you are struggling, or if someone you love is struggling with addiction and I can help, don't hesitate to reach out.
You're a good man, Ed.
I'll give you my phone number, 5-374-9908. Call me or text me. I'm on the East Coast, so I'm old, so I go to bed early. So no middle of the night calls, please. But all I ask is that you understand that anything you might hear from me is just a suggestion. I will help as best I can, but they're only suggestions, and you do what works best for you. But go to my website if you want my book. It's www.edkressy.com. You get my book there. You can go on Amazon, and if you hate the thing, just shoot me a text, and you'll get your money back, and you will still have a matching donation for the book you bought. You will still send one to an incarcerated person.
That's super cool that you're putting some of this towards a good cause too, that you're not just all doing it for profit, because that's one thing I've seen a lot of people do. They have a hard life and then they try to profit from that. They make their whole life about making money off that. And it doesn't sound like that's necessarily your goal here. You're actually trying to do good for other people. And I think that's a beautiful thing, Ed.
Well, what they say, you never see a U-Haul following a hearse.
I've never heard that.
Right? You never see. You can't die broke on a full stomach.
That's fair.
Right?
Yeah.
And if there, some going back to what we were saying, our lives upon this earth will end. I believe that there's going to be a form of God. God is not going to ask me for a bank statement.
That's true.
God is not going to ask me for a mutual fund. If I invested with a good yield and rate of return, God's going to want to know, did I use my gifts in service to others? And hopefully when that time comes, as I believe it will, I can have some good evidence to show that I use the many gifts that so many beautiful, amazing people, you yourself, Dana included, the gifts bestowed upon me, hopefully I'm using them in service to others.
Well, I hope we can get this message out there to more people, man, and I hope people buy your book, because it sounds like you've got a lot of great stuff to talk about. For those listening, you can find this podcast later. It's going to be on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. If you haven't, if you're listening to this somewhere else, you can always follow me here on Twitch at twitch.tv/LemonPops. And Ed, again, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
My man, thank you for having me. This has been great.
Hey, thank you.